Yep. Thank you. All right. So next up, we have Rikki Marzan talking to us about classroom engagement, which would be really great. Also, just a quick reminder that you can interact with people via Oxford Abstract. So if you want to follow up with folks and ask questions, burning questions, please welcome.
Hi, good morning. I'm Rikki. I am actually a high school teacher, so a little out of the museum here, but I do work with the Natural History Museum. I am from Los Angeles and I teach in LA Unified. So I'm going to talk a little bit about taking your work and bringing it into my classroom and other classrooms. So one of the big things we have a problem with is with museums, a lot of people will look at them as something for the culturally elite. It's something that is not always attainable for all of our students to go to, whether it's access just getting to the museums or once they're there, the materials. How does it apply to them? So we want to dismantle those barriers in science. We want students to go to the museum and see themselves there, see themselves working not only as a docent, but maybe even behind the scenes as a scientist too. We want to expand their perspectives in the classroom. When we teach science, we have our textbooks, which are finally updated because that even took 15 years for us as well. But we want them to be able to see not themselves in the books, but also see how they can apply that science to their world. They're stuck on their video games. They're stuck on their phones all the time. They don't get out of their houses, especially in this post-Zoom world. And we're trying to reconnect them with the material itself and show them that science is more than just a person in a lab coat staring at a specimen. So we want to increase their learning opportunities. How can we get them to learn outside the room, go beyond the TV, go beyond their Zoom life, and also access and equity? For LA Unified students, we are a huge range of students we have homeless students in my school to students who have a lot of money and have access to materials. So how can we get that access for all the students so they can all be successful? And we also want to build partnerships with our museums, with our staff, and bring them into our classrooms, and of course, enhance our STEM careers. I teach at a medicine high school for science. So we actually have a lot of students who are interested in science, but they think of science as, I'm going to be a doctor. So what are the other access that they can have? So how do we build that bridge between collections and our K through 12 educators? So we took 15 elementary teachers, grades K through 1, and 5 high school teachers were a mix of STEM education. So chemistry and math were actually the focus. And they had a mix of background in marine science. Some of them had little to no expertise in it. Some of them just had some interest in it. But for our K through 6 teachers, they actually don't even have much science background to begin with. But all of our teachers were veteran teachers. So they all had at least 7 years of experience in the classroom, with many having over 30 years of experience. So as with all different types of teachers, we hate PD. We hate professional development with a passion, because normally we're just told, go to this professional development, and it doesn't apply to us. I have been to ones on how to access your email in this day and age. So we're like, what do teachers really want? What do they want to see in their classrooms? Because if we're going to do a professional development, we want to make it meaningful for everybody. So we ask them some things. What works in your classroom? So they want connections to grade level standards. We all have our new standards for K through 12th grade. How does this apply to us in the classroom? Hands-on experiences, get them out of the textbook, get them off of their Chromebooks and their computers, put something in their hands, and also get them to make some observations. And of course, there is no easy way to do this because there's a ton of challenges in the classroom. You see it on the news all the time, access to materials. Some schools have money that they can throw at their students and give them everything they want, while other schools are struggling just to get textbooks to their kids. We have schools that can fund 100 different field trips where other schools can only have 3 field trips for the entire school, which means you have to pick and choose which students are going to get to go to the museum that year. We want to align with standards. The standards came out a few years ago, but taking the time to actually align our curriculum. Every time we go in for a lesson plan, they're like, how does this align with your curriculum? Well, I wanted to have some fun with the kids. They want to learn something. Well, how does it align? So we want to make sure it aligns to everything, grade-specific content. Museums have great access for K through 8th graders. It's when we get to high school, sometimes the kids have been to the museum so many times. How does it apply to our high school biology class or our chemistry classes? We want to get those kids involved as well. Development of interdisciplinary. How do we connect math and science? I can't tell you how many times I'm doing a graphing class and the kids go, why is this not math class? Because we have to do graphs in science. But can't we do that in math? No, you have to do it in science too. But also keeping our local resources. We have a ton of different materials available to us in our local communities. How do we get our communities involved in it as well? But the number one thing is time. Once the school day is done, We're tired, but we still have to make our lesson plans. We still have to grade. We have to find new lesson plans. We have to vet those lesson plans. We have to see how it's going to fit into our curriculum. See if our students are even going to like it. And then, of course, what somebody tells us to teach doesn't work in the classroom. We have to modify it and make it our own. So how can the museum support our teachers? Making those connections, especially for our inner city schools. A lot of these schools, our students have never been to a museum. I've worked 4 miles from the beach. I have students who've never been to the beach before because they didn't even know what direction it was, and they're in high school. So we take them to the beach and they're like, oh, it's water. Yes, we've got stuff here. Making those connections to the standards, hands-on activities for students and resources for all levels, not just our K through 8, but also our high school kids, chemistry. Our math classes, not just algebra, but how do we use statistics? I've listened this morning to a lot of the data that you guys are giving. How do we bring that into the classroom for our students? And of course, making it multi-subject. So some of the resources our teachers really wanted when we asked them were things like looking at acid-base equilibrium, transfer of energy, conservation, marine protected areas, evolutionary history for marine life, food webs, grade level lessons specifically, and of course, climate change was a big topic. So taking all the things that teachers wanted in our professional development, we sat down with California State University of Dominguez Hills, DigIn researchers, affiliates from Natural History Museum, and our lead teachers like myself. And we designed a 4-day workshop to really focus on what teachers needed and so that they would actually walk away with something they could do. So the task to our participants, our teachers, was to create a lesson or a unit based on content from the workshop and also to provide feedback to the researchers on what we need for our classrooms. So this 4-day workshop based around the feedback was going to use all these resources, and each day was going to have a different focus. Whether we were going out to the community to look at community resources, whether we were in the classroom looking at classroom resources, or whether we could even do Zoom as well. So one day we spent at the Natural History Museum, where they got to go back behind the scenes, learning from scientists, researchers, community experts, because who doesn't love going behind the scenes? Because even for students, it makes them feel special. It gives them that perspective, like I got to do something that somebody else didn't get to do. So they get really involved. Teachers are the same way. We want to go back behind the scenes and do things that the rest of the public doesn't get to do. So by seeing what was actually happening behind the scenes and not just looking at a bunch of dead animals and exhibits, no offense, but they actually got to see what was going on and see that the museum is actually alive. It is not just a bunch of specimens, but there's real work happening in the labs. We went out into the community so that students and teachers would find resources for field trips, create partnerships with our local resources, how the museum itself uses them for their own research as well, and how we can use them in our classrooms. And then we also had our veteran teachers talk about how we use resources from the museum already in our classrooms. So they can see that it is doable, and it just takes, of course, that one word, time, in order to do it. So one of the things we asked the teachers to do was to create lessons, units, or curriculum maps. Another thing that teachers don't like to do is be told what to do. We like to teach. We went to school to teach. We didn't go to school to create lesson plans and paperwork. That is for somebody else's job. So we asked the teachers to create something that you would actually use. Don't give us a template. What are you going to do in the class? And for that time, we gave them time every single day. So each day it was time to take in what they had learned from our researchers, from the museum staff, and actually have the time to process it, talk to each other and talk to our researchers to get more information. If they wanted to know about lobsters and how they could use it in a math class, they used that data and they would talk to our researchers, and they could bring in those extra resources the next day. So some of the things we got from our teachers, this is from a middle school science teacher. It is a bilingual school, and so they take their students to the museum every year. So their problem is if you keep taking your kids every year, they see the same thing year after year and they have the same lesson. How are we going to differentiate it? Make it different so they're actually getting something else out of it. So they did a 3-year lesson where each time they went to the museum, they'd be building on what they had learned in previous years. Or our secondary science for chemistry, they decided to make a curriculum map, actually taking information and how they would take it into their classroom throughout the entire year. Or our math teachers wanted to integrate more science into it to show students that science and math do actually go together. Now we have to work on English so students know how to write as well. But they looked at the Common Core standards, the science standards, as well as how to apply it in the real world. And it applies that transfer of knowledge so that students can start to see in both their math and science classes how we connect and increase their scores, because of course, everything comes down to state testing. And so how do we increase our scores across the board? But for our researchers, there were benefits for both researchers and teachers. There was the lesson plan designs, of course, answering questions. How do we bring those resources into the classroom? Also, what are those resources? We don't have the time always to look and find them. The benefits to our researchers was they could actually understand what our standards were, what we teach in the classroom, and also the needs of the teachers. What do we need from them? And of course, this leads to actually bringing it into the classroom. So these are my kids this year. And so they got to have our researchers in the classroom and our collections managers. They spent the year with them, and now our students are very invested in it, and they spend time in my classroom at lunch and nutrition, or even on their own time going to the museum to visit their favorite staff at the museum on their weekends and their free time. And now those students are actually thinking about going on to school for college in science careers that they weren't necessarily thinking about beforehand, because they're building ROVs, or they're doing technology, or they can even take pictures of science stuff, and that is all stuff that they didn't think of beforehand. So with that, thank you. And here's just a little extra from my teacher friends who were like, what do you want to teach? And of course, they like dolphins. Everyone likes dolphins. Thank you. I'm here for questions, or I'm going to run away.
This is really awesome. Do you think that there are ways, do you have ideas of ways to take this a little bit broader? Because, right, this is very regionally focused, the year that you were at this run of the workshop. But ideas for how you go about, right, teachers from multiple counties, multiple states, like they all have different breaks, different vacations, different time. Professional development does sound like a nightmare. Like, so how do we think about making opportunities for teachers more broadly?
Yeah, so making it more broad, I know that this summer we're bringing in, we have other researchers coming in from different museums and teachers coming in from around the United States that will be spending a week with us to do a similar workshop, but also having them have time with their researchers, think about what kind of resources do you have in your neighborhoods as well. So hoping to expand that to other museums in their neighborhoods. And of course, talking with even smaller organizations and community organizations and making that time and connections, because that is a big one, that time aspect of things. So it is a slow spread, but hoping that this summer with the other institutes coming in, and we'll do the same workshop, and then we have one more year and see how it spreads from there. And my classroom is always open if all of you want to visit or guest speak.
Thank you for the great talk, Rikki. I'm curious because something that I'm interested in, and I don't work directly with educators, just indirectly through collection tours and such, but the data that we're producing, it occurs to me and several others that that data could really be useful for lessons, and that there could be some fascinating project for K through 12 kids that they could derive from mining the data, kind of maybe teachers with the help of scientists mining data, trying to figure out what would be really cool and interesting for students to be able to download a data set, ask a question, answer the question, and really be doing science. Do you have any ideas for that, or did you guys cover that in any of the workshop materials that you have done so far?
We had briefly talked about how to think about data sets specifically that are coming from museums. So we can take those data sets, and if they are available online, that is part of that, especially that high school level math that we would use, that we could even take data sets and figure out how to do things like our warm-ups right now, we're focusing on a lot of graphing. So how do we take certain data sets, and even if you guys are separating it into like, this stuff can be graphed or this stuff is measured, and having students create their own graphs and measurements, it's something that both math and science teachers can actually use in classes, just basic warm-ups to get them interested in the material before we even set it up. I actually am collaborating with one of my math teachers on a 9th grade project. So we have a cohort of students that they do the lab with me, and they collect the data, and they go to her class afterwards, and they have to do all the data analysis. And so they're able to start to see those connections between the classes. And sometimes they'll start it in her class and they finish analysis with me, because I'll do the writing portion of it. And so even taking, and we're doing our warm-ups the same way. So they'll start with data sets we've been downloading from different institutes, or graph of the week kind of ideas, so that students are starting to see it at least once a week from us, those different types, and actually using real data would be something we could use in class too, even for our stats classes.